Hey, Laura, take us away. Unmute yourself. No, still muted, Laura. No, still muted, Laura. No, still muted.
With you.
Now you go ahead.
I will in 1 second. Sorry about this. Good evening from Jerusalem. I'm Laura Kam, the Director of Communications at the Jewish People Policy Institute, an independent center for strategic planning and policy for the Jewish people in Israel and the diaspora. In light of the current crisis and ongoing war, JPPI will provide a daily in-depth analysis and insight from Israel. Yaakov Katz, former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post and author of numerous books on military strategy and geopolitics, will open and moderate today's discussion, followed by Einat Wolf, former JPPI senior fellow and member of the Knesset, Lahav Harkov, political and diplomatic correspondent at Jewish Insider, and finally, Avi Gil, JPPI senior fellow and former director general of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For our viewers, please ask your questions in the chat box and we'll get to as many as possible. Yaakov, over to you.
Thank you, Laura, and I want to thank everybody for being here again with us. As we've spoken in the past, this can be watched also on the Times of Israel website and on their Facebook page, and we have a Q&A box here at the bottom, so I'd love for everyone to send in their questions and give it to us so we can engage and have a deeper conversation with your input. There's a lot going on, and I would say probably the big news of just this last half hour is the National Unity Government that has just been established. Maybe we'll get to that in this conversation, but I do want to share why I was missing yesterday. So, and I wasn't at this webinar. 2 nights ago, I got a phone call from a friend who used to serve in Sayeret Matkal, the elite IDF commando unit. And he calls me to say that a friend of his, who was one of his teammates back in, 15, 20 years ago when they were in the army, is now lives in America. He's an American Israeli. His mother is an Israeli American as well, from Kibbutz Be'eri down south. That was where one of the great tragedies took place in the massacre on this past Saturday. I think 100 or so people were murdered just in Kibbutz Be'eri, and they cannot find his mother. And their question to me was, as someone who knows a bit about media, should they be playing up the American identity that this woman also has in the media? And I, of course, said, yes, right? That is what will get you some traction. The whole US media is interested in all of this. The following morning, I happen to do an interview with CNN, and the anchor said something along the lines of, we know that there's 11 or 12 dead Americans in this awful war, but we don't yet know of anyone who's been abducted. And then I started to think, okay, actually, another family number 2. So this was the Netta family. I knew the Goldberg Poland family. And I spoke to another friend who said he also knows of the families. We already have 3 families of American Israelis, and we found a 4th. And then about 10 o'clock in the morning, we decided that at 4 p.m., we're going to put together a press conference. And I just have to call out and say thank you to the Carlton Hotel in Tel Aviv, which gave us a free venue. Then we got a company that came and gave us a free live streaming service. We had 50 different media companies or outlets that came. We had Lester Holt from NBC. We had Becky Anderson from CNN. We had the 4 families who came and told their story, aired live on CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, out to the entire world. And fast forward just 5 hours later, it was emotional, it was beautiful. I mean, to watch the journalists were breaking down, listening to these families. 5 hours later, President Biden gives his speech. And that speech, he talks about that we now know that there are American hostages, and we now know, and everyone should know that one of the most important things to me as president is rescuing or retrieving U.S. hostages wherever they are in the world. I don't know that was because of this press conference, but I just wanted to share, everybody, I found myself into this because of a phone call and then taking a walk on a street in Jerusalem and bumping into another friend who knew what he did, what he knew, and then coming together and deciding, let's just do something. And that's just what it came together. And I say this as, definitely I'm happy and proud of what we were able to achieve. But that's what the war does, right? This is a moment in time where people just are running and figuring it out and improvising. And that's the Israeli, I would say, kind of the Israeli trait, right? Adapt, improvise, and try to make things happen as you move along. So I want to do what we've done over the last couple of days and go to our panelists real quickly. And they could give me in 1 minute, what is the big story for them, at least, over the last 24 hours since we last met. So Lahav, why don't I start with you?
I wasn't in the webinar yesterday either, so I'm not entirely sure if this was discussed or exactly what time it came out. But I mean, the fact they let journalists into Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutzim by the border, they found 40 babies killed. They found babies who were beheaded, multiple babies who were beheaded. And it's like, how do we even get past that? How do we get over that? It's just so barbaric. And to me, like it overshadows everything. You have no words for that.
Yeah. Avi, your 1 minute kind of big story of the last 24 hours?
Well, I think that the Biden speech, which to me is no less than historic expression of American special relations, a strong friendship, and huge commitment to Israel and the Jewish people. I think this is the major story of the day.
Einat, you got to unmute yourself.
So my story echoes a bit of yours in terms of the combination that is once that a lot of the systems are not functioning, but actually a lot of local organizations are making up for that. So according to official protocol, during wartime, ministers, official representatives of the government do not actually have to be at funerals because this is wartime. And there is a sense that many of the ministers are hiding behind protocol to actually avoid the public wrath in going to funerals. And one of the most important activists in Israel, Yael Scherer, basically said she couldn't stand the idea that no one will come to these funerals. And she has been one of the torch lighters in Yom Ha'atzmaut. And she started organizing semi-official people, so people who've lit the torch. And then I joined her with bringing together former members of Knesset. And I was already in 2 funerals today, and I'm going to one later today. And I have to say, it's kind of weird. Like I don't represent anyone. But in meeting with the families, it's so meaningful that someone that is even just semi-official actually comes. And for me, this represents both the dark and the light of what we've been experiencing in the last few days, the complete breakdown of our government and our systems, but also the remarkable organization of the people from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's what makes us unique, right? Is that unfortunately, I always say, and we were saying always through the judicial overhaul fight, right? That but the only thing that will bring us together, right? And everyone's saying this cynically, is a war, right? A war is what will bring us together. It's unfortunate that we need a war to bring us together. We should be able to find a way that we can come together without a war, right? That would be ideal. But Laura, I want to go to you. What's kind of in your 1 minute, the big story that you see over the last 24 hours?
Yes, my story of the last 24 hours is speaking to my Holocaust survivor mother in New York, who simply cannot get over the fact that, as Lahav mentioned, that Jewish babies are being killed again. She is simply overwhelmed and distraught by this. Never thought that she would see this again in her lifetime, but she is.
And that's something, the president of Israel made that comment that on Saturday, the most Jews died in a single day since the Holocaust. So I want to jump into some of our topics today. And I want to start with you, Avi. President Biden gave, I think, was a remarkable speech. I mean, I think there was not an Israeli who was not moved. He could have said half of what he said, and Israelis would have been floored, right? But he gave a fantastic speech that was moving, showed how close America is aligned with us, shows there's no daylight, forget about daylight. It's like it's as close as it's possibly could be, and issued some clear warnings to particularly Hezbollah and Iran. Secretary Blinken's coming tomorrow. Walk us through what is the significance practically of what we're seeing here. And I also, I would say people have been wondering, why is Israel not gone yet into Gaza? It could be because of the National Unity government, but I would think also we could say what we say about this government, but Netanyahu did do a good job in building up some legitimacy internationally. So what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, it was really an amazing speech, a very powerful speech, emphasizing the support of America in a dire time that we are experiencing now in Israel, promising security assistance, intelligence, diplomatic support, threatening Israel enemies, etc. However, when you read carefully the text of this speech, we must pay attention to several insights, and they relate to the American interests. And I believe that when Blinken visiting Israel, he will work hard to clarify a few things to himself and to his Israeli counterparts. And I think that the most important insights from that speech, beyond the, again, amazing support of Biden and America, one is Israel has no free hand and no infinite time to act. And two, the dependence, strategic dependence of Israel in Washington. I'll be happy to elaborate later, but these are the two important points, two important insights that I'm seeing in the speech.
Right, and I think that we kind of everyone understands, right, that this window of the legitimacy and the amazing support that Israel has, that will begin to start to close at some point as the ground offensive takes place. Casualties will start to climb. Unfortunately, sadly, likely on both sides. We hope not, but that is going to be unfortunate consequence of a ground offensive into Gaza. So that will start to narrow. And Lahav, let me go to you then. I'm guessing that the government here is perfectly aware of that, right? But we have seen this really tremendous diplomatic blitz. How long would you estimate that this will last, right? This groundswell of support?
I mean, I think it'll last until there are enough terrible looking pictures from Gaza that start to, I don't want to say balance out, but even outweigh the terrible pictures that we see in Israel. I mean, I even see it now. I'm sure all of us here have done TV hits, and you see the B-roll, right? The videos that they have in the background, and it shows houses destroyed in Gaza as opposed to what's going on in Israel. And I know from people who are working in PR or doing all kinds of volunteer efforts to try to make sure that they have B-roll from Israel so that when I'm talking about Israel, you don't see pictures from Gaza, right? But I think that that's going to have a big impact, and that it's important for Israel to try to keep the message out that this war was forced on us, that we were not just attacked, but this incredibly savage, barbaric massacre. But there's a format, right? The news is used to working in certain formats. And the international press is used to talking about the Palestinian victims all the time. And so I think that will narrow the window. It gives us not that much time.
I was just before coming onto this webinar, I did a hit on NBC. And the reporter who's down south, she was on right before me, and she was talking about, yeah, I've seen rockets, but Israel has Iron Dome. The Palestinians in Gaza don't have Iron Dome. And that whole idea and rationale of we have Iron Dome and they don't need an Iron Dome because we don't just discriminately fire at civilians, right? The reason we need
Yeah.
America, that's exactly what they're doing. But
I mean,
that's already starting to take root in that conversation.
no, I mean, I saw this senior editor from The Economist who tweeted something like, we heard about all these babies being killed in Israel, but babies die when Israel does airstrikes too. And I'm like, you don't, and they're like he basically was like, a dead baby's a dead baby, it doesn't make a difference. And I'm like, you don't see a difference between someone who walks into a home, sees the baby with their own eyes and decides to cut its head off, as opposed to there's an airstrike on a building and there's collateral damage. And I mean, every life that's lost is horrible, but how do you not see the difference?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And so Einat, that leads me to the question I wanted to ask you. This moral equivalency that people are trying to create, where we're seeing this play out very interestingly. And it's making a lot of noise within the Jewish communities in America. It's less breaking out yet to Israel. We're much more focused still, the aftermath of the massacre, naturally so. Is what's going on at universities, right? Harvard University, NYU, and just for our listeners who might not be aware, so you can read about this, in more detail, but Harvard University, bunch of student groups came out with these statements, basically trashing, accusing Israel of all the violence here, right? And Harvard didn't do anything, not a word, I think until Monday, when finally the Harvard president put out a statement. He came under attack from Larry Summers, the former Harvard president and former Treasury Secretary under President Obama, who was appalled and basically said when it was, the universities trying to say, well, we don't take political stand. He's like, well, when it was Ukraine, you had a Ukrainian flag flying at the Harvard yard, right? And after George Floyd and all these things, how to take a stand. So they put out another statement trying to make up for the other one. NYU, similar case. What is going on in these intellectual centers in America?
So first, we need to understand that what's happening on the university campuses is what feeds into the media and everything. So the things that we later need to deal with in the media, they come from a deep intellectual background that has created certain mindsets. And when this happened, I'm a Harvard graduate, and I tweeted that just as in February 1933, the Oxford Union, immediately after Hitler becomes chancellor, stages a very famous debate and ultimately decides that this House, under no circumstances, will not fight for king and country. We now have in 2023 another elite institution, Harvard and many others, this time saying, all violence is basically Israel's fault. This was their key sentence. We hold Israel responsible for all unfolding violence. And this is the intellectual background from which policies emerge. So the intellectual background of the Oxford students is why Britain had appeasement for much, much longer than was good for the world, basically. It created an intellectual area where policymakers could basically pursue appeasement with Hitler because they knew that their elites thought in the same way. And we have the same notion. We have basically elites that are pursuing appeasement with barbarians and with people who actually historically continued the Nazi ideology. We know, one can read the books of Jeffrey Herf, the Palestinian vision emerges from the 30s and 40s with the insertion of Nazi ideology into the Arab world. Certainly the Islamic one that goes into Hamas is a direct continuation with that. And yet what we see in the world, we see among the intellectual elites is a deep, deep desire for the modern form of appeasement, a deep desire to believe that Hamas and Palestinians want nothing more than a state or independence or to end the occupation, limited goals that a rational Westerner can identify. And to think that what they want is what they've said in so many events, Itbach el Yahud, we want to slaughter the Jews, that again, many intellectuals would translate Itbach, they will translate as resist, El Yahud, they would translate as Israel. There's a desire for blindness. There's a desire not to see. So just as the British intellectuals did not want to see what Hitler was about, until in many ways it was too late for the world, we see that the American and the Western intellectual elites don't want to see. and it's front of their eyes and they just don't want to see.
It's amazing how there's these attempts to make this moral equivalency between what's happening on both sides of this border. And I think that, you know, the IDF has been doing a pretty effective job. What Lahav mentioned before of taking those the reporters, to Kfar Aza and showing them what's going on there is some efforts and steps in the right direction. But Avi, I want to go to you for a moment and talk about the aftermath of this national unity government that has just been established, right? One of the reasons that some people say is, and if I recall correctly, and you'll know better than I do, but this happened before the 6-Day War, right? There was a national unity government that came together, is basically to reassure the public on the one hand, but also I would hope to make good decisions inside the government. And people were saying, and it seems to an extent, that maybe the ground offensive was waiting for the establishment of this national unity government. How do you look at what is the significance of what we're seeing right now?
Well, we in Israel, people of Israel, we don't know as of now what are the actual instructions that the IDF is getting from the government. And maybe now, when we have a new cabinet of war, the IDF will know clearly what is supposed to achieve, and also us, the citizens of Israel. I think that the nature of the new war cabinet will calm many Israelis, because it looks much more.
Let me just tell our listeners, the war cabinet is going to consist of Netanyahu, the prime minister, Benny Gantz, who's now joining as the head of national unity, defense minister Yoav Gallant, and those are the three. And then you're going to have as observers, strategic affairs minister Ron Dermer and former chief of staff Gadi Eisenkot from Gantz's side. So that's pretty much the makeup. Sorry.
So most of the Israeli, first of all, they want, especially in such a time, a national unity government, and they want people with experience to be part of the decision-making on such grave questions, and that's what we have today in the decision to establish such a national unity government, or emergency cabinet, as we say.
So, Lahav, you were obviously following the politics of all of this, and you were writing about these politics back during COVID in 2020, when Benny Gantz formed a coalition with Netanyahu. There was supposed to be the rotation. We all remember the famous line, "No more tricks, no more shticks." And then all we saw were tricks and shticks. And Benny Gantz never was able to become the prime minister in that rotation that was supposed to become. They played some games with the budgets. I'm not going to get into all of it right now, no longer relevant. How can, Benny Gantz, what is going through his mind? Like, he must know, someone must be telling him, Benny, he's going to trick you again. He's bringing you in because he wants whatever failures are going to come to stick to you as opposed to stick to him or someone else to share the blame with. But Gantz is a good guy, so he's coming in. I mean, there's got to be a little more complication to it.
So during COVID, there was a small contingent of COVID skeptics, we'll call them, and they had this phrase that became common in Israel, that COVID was the flu with good PR. So my sources told me that not to call Gantz a COVID skeptic, but he basically said, like, I joined the government for the flu with good PR. I'm not going to join when there's like a massive war. So that was his logic. I'm sure he's well aware that Netanyahu did not keep his promises in the past, that there was a problematic government when he joined last time. I think that he is hoping that Netanyahu will take this much more seriously, because a lot of people died of COVID, so you can't say that the gravity of the situation is such that, it's important that everyone unite. And I think that he's trying his best to make it nothing's going to be foolproof, but to make it so that they're advancing the goals of managing and fighting this war as best as possible and not dealing with anything else right now. And we have to hope, I just don't think there's any appetite, whether on the right or left, for normal politics.
Right.
They only, the government has to deal with this. And in terms of who's responsible, look, the biggest failing right now, please God, there won't be a bigger failing than this, but the biggest failing was that this was able to happen. The intelligence failing, the lack of a response for hours and hours after Hamas invaded. So that's not on Gantz. He was in the opposition.
Right. Einat, I can imagine you're probably happy with the formation of this new national unity government. Does it give, it gives more confidence, but what I would want to know from you specifically is, does it also give, is possibly the thinking by Netanyahu, it gives more international legitimacy, which is what he will need going into this ground offensive, where that window is going to start to narrow?
Even more basic than legitimacy, it's a sense of that, not all is lost. If we look at Israel's history, there's only been actually two truly right-wing governments without what I call the Mapai babysitter, without any kind of centrist or leftist traditional labor that was in the government to essentially babysit the right wing. It's Begin in 1981, and it's this government. All other governments always had a Mapai babysitter. And indeed, Begin's government is one of the worst in Israel's history, with inflation and with the Lebanon war. And I think what Gantz is doing is stepping into the role of the traditional Mapai babysitter, basically saying this government cannot be trusted to run the country when the country is at stake. The very Zionist ideal, the very notion of the state and its commitment to the defense of the Jewish people. And in his mind, he just needs to be there. And I think that is what the international community, the United States, and many of Israel's citizens will appreciate, just having someone there to kind of see over the tendencies that historically have not taken Israel in good direction.
So we have a question from Sam Friedman that I want to get to, because I think it's interesting and relevant for all our listeners. And I'd like to get all your input on this one, because it's important. Sam is asking, what are the best ways for regular folk, that's what he's calling it in quotation marks, to fight the important PR war in the wake of everything that's happening? What can, Lahav, you have a big social media following. What would your recommendation be to regular people out there, right, who don't have 100 and something thousand? Sorry if I forgot the exact number of followers on X or Twitter, whatever it's called these days.
Look, I think everybody has their own strengths and everybody has their own network. If you work for a large company, maybe your company would be willing to put out a statement of support or would be able to match donations from its employees. I know Oracle is doing that. I've seen other companies that don't have an Israeli CEO. I've done things like that as well. If you have friends who have a large social media following, or even if you have a small social media following, but not all of your friends are necessarily Jews who support Israel, make sure people know what's really going on. Just and show up for Israelis and for, I think you're Jewish, so maybe showing up for Jews is different, but there's rallies and the Israelis see it and they appreciate the support, I think, of the US. And of course, there's many places where you can donate. There's a lot of fundraising going on for Friends of the IDF, for Red Magen David, and they all need support in this time.
Well, you could also do what Elon Musk announced just earlier today, which is, what was it? The chargers for Teslas will be free now in Israel. So if anyone here has a Tesla, go charge up your car. Avi, I want to go to you. You're the more traditional diplomat, right? You were the Director General of the Foreign Ministry. At least among us, you're the more traditional diplomat. So what can a regular person do? Should they be calling up their congressman? Should they be writing a letter to their local newspaper? Like, what would you tell someone?
Well, maybe I'm the traditional diplomat, but I'm not a big believer in Asbara. And therefore, maybe I'm not the right person to be asked some questions. Everyone should do his best. Yes, I agree. But I think that more importantly is the awareness of the Israeli government, Israeli decision makers to that aspect, the PR aspect of the war. And they have to devise their tactics, strategy, modus operandis with an eye to the way it will be broadcasted in the networks, in the social media, etc.
Yeah.
And there is a lot to do in that regard.
Yeah. And I was talking with friends, and in Dover Tzahal, I actually got 3 phone calls in the last 3 days if I want to put on a uniform and go enlist and help in Dover Tzahal. And I said, there's 2 reasons why. One is I don't like taking orders from people, and that you have to do in the army. And number 2 is I also enjoy having the freedom when I give an interview to be able to criticize the government. And once you know, because there is criticism that's needed. And once you do that, you won't be able to do that. So to that question, because you've done a ton of Hasbara in your life, and one of Israel's finer speakers, what would you tell that average person on the street? How can they help out?
So here I will echo that everyone needs to first realize what is their strength, what do they have to contribute. One might be a professor and they have a specific field. So those are the issues. But in terms of the context, there's 2 things that are happening. One is like clear campaigns. For example, the Hamas is ISIS, or Hamas is worse than ISIS. And that's one campaign that was, I love that Avi has the confidence that the government will think strategically about the PR. But right now, everything that's been happening has been from the ground up. Anything that's been effective, the whole Hamas is ISIS is the initiative of one remarkable woman called Ella. So there's a lot of these local initiatives, and people can just help magnify them and make sure that they're trending and that they're powerful. That's one direction. Yeah. The direction where I tend to emphasize more is the basic intellectual element. Highlight the history of the conflict, highlight the fact that the idea that Hamas does not represent Palestinians is sadly a comforting delusion, but it's a delusion. Understand the Palestinian ethos, the fact that it's about no Jewish state ever. Understand that what we saw on Saturday is what they want to do given the chance. It's not something that's unrelated to their ethos. So take the opportunity to actually bring in the deeper issues, because we have now a moment where people are willing to listen. In my experience, people are willing to listen when something challenges their worldview. This is why delegations to Israel are so effective, because people come with preconceived notions. They come to Israel, everything doesn't fit what they saw, so they're willing to listen and change their mind. This is a moment where people are actually willing to listen, and this is the opportunity to also discuss the deeper issues.
So it looks like, as we're sitting here, it looks like there is a massive attack that's coming from the north now into Israel. Rocket sirens are going off in the Carmel. Until now, we've had some sporadic rocket fire up along the border, but now it's the Carmel, and reports of people who might have infiltrated from Hezbollah. So we'll have to wait to see how that plays out. But Avi, since I already do have you here, the USS Gerald R. Ford is parked now in the Eastern Mediterranean. And President Biden made a very clear statement last night, right? He said, "I got one word to Hezbollah: don't." Right? He said it twice, so it was kind of like 2 words, but okay. Do you really see a reality that the Gerald R. Ford is going to launch Tomahawk missiles into Lebanon?
Well,
or at least the Stryker group. I don't know if they have Tomahawk missiles.
It's hard to predict, but I think that the initial thing to do is to understand the American interests. and also what is behind the sending of the Ford carrier and the threats that President Biden has issued, etc. And to me, America doesn't want to associate itself with an humanitarian crisis in Gaza. America doesn't want to see the expansion of the war to other fronts, Lebanon and of course Iran. It doesn't want to be dragged into a war in the Middle East. So the threatening and the moves that America is doing is in order to avoid such a deterioration, but it may happen.
And I hope that that's not what's happening right now, but I do want to stick to our quick, our time limit here. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. You'll be able to find the full webinar at the Times of Israel website and on its Facebook page. And as we've been signing off pretty much every night since we started this earlier this week, let's hope for a peaceful evening. Although as news is breaking as we speak, it does not look like that is where we're headed right now. So thanks to Avi, Lahav, Laura, Einat, and to all our viewers, Shalom v'litrot.